Right, let's go ahead and change and edit our trousers a little bit so they start to look a little bit more like what we're after. Okay, so again, we're not really trying to reinvent the trousers here. We just want maybe a bit more detail and for it to kind of sit a little bit, well, a little bit more accurately to what we're looking for. For example, I want the trouser to kind of sit a little higher up. So like we did before, we can kind of tug and pull, and you can be quite extreme about this, don't worry. Okay, you can tug and pull at the garment there. Now, if you're suffering from performance issues because at the time of this particular recording there is a drought of GPUs, okay, you can of course go into settings, user settings here, and you can under your graphics options, I recommend turning anti-aliasing off. You don't need it. You don't need those lovely smooth edges like you do in video games, so just turn them off. Save your graphics card a little bit of stress, okay? So let's go ahead and hit close on that, and you can see now that our trousers are actually kind of more in line with where we expected them to be, rather than halfway down her legs, okay? So, if you like the fitting on it, that looks pretty good, not so bad. Yeah, that's okay, not so bad. But I want to add a little bit more detail. You've probably seen wonderful, fantastic crease work done in kind of Marvelous Designer, lovely fabric folds and everything like that. We haven't got much going on here, and that's because of two reasons. So if we select all of these mesh components here, you can see that our particle distance down here under simulation properties is set to 20. Now what does that mean? If we go over here and we enable wireframe, let's go for the yellow one, you can see that there's not a lot of polygonal data there for the simulation to work with. That's not ideal. If we, however, bring the particle distance down to something like 10, and now this definitely depends on your hardware, for the lower the particle distance, the more polygons you'll have, and therefore the more VRAM you'll be using on your graphics card. Okay, so now you can see that we've effectively doubled the amount of polys we've got. If we take wireframe off again, and if we do a simulate, you can see that if some things have changed. You can see the definition on the knees is a little bit better, and we're starting to get some folds in there, but they're very, very hard to see. Okay, so how can we kind of change this and alleviate this a little bit better? Well, there's a lot of settings to play with, and to be honest with you guys, you're going to have to do a lot of playing about this with, by yourselves basically, okay, to see how it's going to work. The first thing I'd bring your attention to is, let's go over to the materials again. Do you remember the physical properties down here with preset? So we're going to go ahead and try and pick the closest, the closest kind of fabric to this. So we could try a lot of these. We could try raw denim. So it's a good idea to leave simulation on so you can see how it gets affected. Or we could try, for example, if we do linen. See, it's getting a little bit loose. It's very, very fine adjustments. But if you go to something like silk, you'll get quite... quite tight wrapping clothing. Okay, so for me, I think I might just leave it on, kind of cotton, sateen, or whatever, something like that. Again, it's just generic trousers I'm after. Okay, now if that doesn't give you any joy, which you can see it hasn't really done here, we can select these again, and we're going to play with the shrinkage weft and the shrinkage warp. I can't say those words. Now, if I remember rightly, I might get these the wrong way around, but shrinkage weft, imagine you put it in the washing machine, okay, and it shrank, or it's enlarged. That's what these settings play with. The weft is vertical shrinkage, and the warp is horizontal shrinkage. Or it's the other way around, I can't quite remember. But let me show you what it does, because that's better. If I type in here something huge, like let's say we bump up shrinkage weft to 110, press enter, you can see that vertically we've now got this kind of fanning out here at the trouser leg at the bottom here, and you can see some little folds starting to form. How about that? Okay, so it's starting to look a little bit more natural. Let's go back and we can actually play with shrinkage warp. What do we do if we do the same there? What happens? Oh, so with 110 in both factors there, you can see we're going to get very kind of baggy trousers. Okay, now that's probably not something that you want necessarily, but you can start to see how the folds are going to come into play a little bit more. Okay, so I like that effect, but I'm going to tone it down a little bit. I'm going to bring it down to 105. Okay, maybe 107. Okay, like I said, this is a lot of play. Okay, and let's see what happens if you do it the opposite way. 95, so we'll bring it below 100. What happens? You can see it gets a little bit tighter. So I'm actually going to leave it. Let's put it on 115 and see what happens. Very kind of baggy there. You can see it's really quite not, it's not tight anymore, and we can check how tight it is if we go over to this window, I think. Yes, so if we click on there and we click on strain map, you can see that anything that's highlighted red is incredibly tight. So where we're getting some of that tightness there, and you can see we're getting tightness around the knee, we're getting tightness there and around there, and you can see as you pull the garment away there. Okay, so you can see what's particularly tight, and at the moment the trousers are quite loose fitting. If I change that setting, like for example I brought this down to 85, you can see it's incredibly tight. It's basically saying I can't breathe. Okay, so we're going to undo that and leave it kind of loose, but I think that's a little bit too loose. I'm going to whop it up to 110. Okay, now let's turn the heat map off. Okay, so what else can we do to try and get some of these patterns back out? So generally speaking, the bigger the garment, the more folds you're going to get. So this garment right now looks roughly the right size for her, but if I was to select all of this and just make the garment slightly bigger, so we can hold down shift and we'll drag these up, and they're uniformly scaling, you can see there, and let go. So I've made the garment slightly bigger. You'll see the 3D window updated itself a little bit. It looks a bit rough and weird, but if we press spacebar now, you're going to find that, there we go, the bigger the garment, the more kind of folds you're going to get. Now this is ridiculous, okay, this is obviously far too big for our character, so we're not going to do that. So I'm going to undo that, Control Z, there we go, simulate again. This is roughly the right size for our character, that's okay. We could make it a smidge bigger, and I'll show you what kind of difference just a little tweak will do. So a little tweak like that, every time you resize it, do a resimulation like that, and then you've got that there. Okay, now can you see a problem? This part here is fairly loose. What can we do to address that? Well, we could keep resizing it all the time, or we can actually go back to our original designs here, and this is where that linked editing is going to play a huge crucial part. We can actually edit some of these points. So you see this line here, this is fairly big, and you can see there's a lot of slack at the back here. What happens if we shorten this line? Let's bring it down to 145-ish. Okay, simulate. All of a sudden it's tighter. We want to check, we can activate the heat map, and we can see it's now fairly tight. That's a bit too tight. Let's bring it up to 158. And we'll simulate. And there we go, the trousers breathe a little bit more, but it's not so slack at the top. Okay, bear in mind that the character of course is wearing belts, so it's not such a big deal if it's too loose, but I just wanted to point that out to you just in case you were not sure. Okay, now let's say that's still not enough fabric detail. What can we do? Well, there's a last resort. Now you have to use this tool quite sparingly, okay, and you'll see why in a minute. You see this iron up here, it's steam, right? Not steam like the wonderful games library, but steam like you would iron it. Now the hotter something gets, let's go ahead and put this simulation on. So if I do shrinkage up in the positive values, like let's make it something crazy like 20% just to show you. Okay, I'm just going to steam it over here. Watch this part. You can see, basically, it makes it very, very baggy. Okay, so with this tool, you can fine-tune the bagginess, quote unquote, or you can kind of exaggerate the folds if you like. Okay, of course you can undo that. So I recommend playing with very small values like 3%, and they do stack, so you can paint them around here, and you can see I'm starting to get some folds there. But it's true for the opposite as well. If you go into the minus numbers, and let's say we kind of, kind of turn those parts there blue, you're going to get a bit of a tighter fit, and there's not going to be so much kind of folds happening there. Okay, so I want a few more folds around this back area here, so you can see as I heat that up, that's going fine. And I want some folds down the side here as well, so I'm just going to go ahead down the side here and apply a bit down the side, and you can see that linked editing is working out quite nicely. Okay, now we don't want to go too overboard. Like I said, we want to use this quite sparingly, so don't get too kind of trigger happy with it, I guess. Okay, because there's a little bit of another part that we're going to have to be aware of before we're happy with our kind of folds and changes. Okay, so you can also pick apart the garment as well to try and get it a bit more to your liking. Now just as a last little step there, let's put the steam brush away. Let's go over to our material. I'm just going to bring the opacity back down to see how low it's sitting. Yeah, that's okay. I kind of imagine these pants to be fairly loose fitting as well, but if you wanted to be a bit more proper fitting, of course, we can change the height of this here. Let's bring that up a little bit. Okay, so to kind of make the kind of crotch area not hang so low, essentially. It looks a bit better fit. Okay, and of course, the higher you bring this up, the tighter it's going to be, so there's going to be less fabric folds, but let's have a look. Okay, we're not going to see the full effect until we raise the opacity of the material back up again. There we go. So what we've got there is better fitting garments there, and we've still got a nice kind of few folds there. Okay, you might be thinking, well, I've seen better folds in Marvel's Designer. How do we get them? Let me show you. Okay, so before we export this garment here, we're going to select the trouser legs, and we're going to change the particle distance down to 5. And the reason why I've left this to the kind of one of the final steps is because even my GPU, which is nothing amazing, it's an RX 580 from AMD, it will start to significantly lag. So you want to get all your editing done, tweaking done before you step your particle distance down to something like 5. Go ahead and do that, hit enter. Looks like nothing's happened until you hit simulate. Give Marvel's Designer some time to think. And again, we've just doubled the amount of polys it's got to work with. So we're going to get double the resolution effectively, which is a comfortable amount that ZBrush can handle. Okay, and now what do you see? We're getting these very, very lovely, deliberate fabric folds. Now these are folds we're starting to recognize now, but you can see there, as I tweak and pull at the garment, the GPU is struggling to catch up, okay? But we've got this lovely detail around the kind of knees there. That's exactly what we want. And we've got this kind of element there as well. So I think for this part here, I'm actually going to go in and I'm going to see what happens if I go ahead and introduce the steam brush to the back side a little bit, because I want some more folds just around the upper part of her thighs here. Okay, so let's give that time to think, and you can see it's very, very slow now because of the detail. Okay, so let's walk that up to 7%. Just be very cautious about this, and I want some there. Okay, yeah, so a little bit more, and I want it to kind of come around the sides a bit more, so let's bring that down again. Bring it over to the sides. There we go, something like that. Okay, and let's kind of carry that on through. So I'm going to go back to the front part and steam it there a bit. There we go, something like that. So you can see that you still can do some editing, but it just takes forever. Okay, right, fabulous. Okay, so we'll leave it there for now. There you go. So I recommend that in between the videos you play with some of these settings, try and get the folds as accurate to how you would want them to be, etc. But what we're going to do now is we're going to basically figure out a way to clamp the trousers here, because remember, we're going to tuck the trousers into some boots, right? So what's that going to look like, and how can we get some deliberate folds to represent that in Marvel's Designer? Just as a disclaimer, we're not going to go ahead and add these kind of belt loops and whatnot. Personally, I prefer to do them in ZBrush because in Marvel's Designer they can get a little bit messy. Okay, so I'm going to leave all that kind of detail for ZBrush, including the kind of zipper part that would be there as well. Again, I will leave that to ZBrush because it's a bit better to do that in ZBrush. Okay, we're only here essentially just for the folds. Okay, alright then, so I recommend you play with all the tools I've shown you in this video here. Try and get the folds as close as to what you'd like, and then in the next video we'll go ahead and clamp it off down here so we can get some kind of spillage over the boots that she will eventually wear.